Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Today, we're taking another historic step.
Too much talk of Afghanistan, of Americans losing the war and losing face. So the Biden administration dropped a new bombshell. It's called Aukus. That's short for Australia, UK, US, Aukus. A new alliance, apparently to take on China, but also a new arms deal. What's the real purpose? It's anybody's guess. Conflicts are always good news for the arms industry. This time the Americans are selling nuclear technology to the Australians. It works for all sides. More money, more muscle, plus nuclear-powered submarines in the Pacific. China, as expected, is livid. But so is France. They were going to build those submarines. Now the US has got the deal. France calls it a backstab. So much for the alliance of democracies, we say. They can't stop fighting each other. And they all want to do business with China while also selling weapons to counter China. I'm tired of saying this every day, but it really is all about the money. We'll discuss. Also on the show, Taliban leader Mullah Baradar is on Time's 100 most influential people's list. Talk about recognizing terrorists. What's next? A Nobel Peace Prize nomination, perhaps. In Moscow, the president is in isolation after a COVID scare. Many people in Putin's inner circle have tested positive. In Indonesia, citizens have won a landmark case on pollution. The court has held the president and his government guilty of not being able to ensure clean air for the people. And will work from home never end? We'll bring you a special report. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
The United Nations Secretary General stresses that any suggestion that the world body can solve the crisis in Afghanistan is a fantasy.
The UN can now, without that money and without those forces, the UN can now solve the problems that they didn't solve for decades, is of course a fantasy.
Reiterating its limitations in helping the conflicted country. Antonio Guterres had earlier said that Afghanistan is on the verge of a dramatic humanitarian disaster. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson carries out a major reshuffle of his cabinet. Liz Truss, who was expected to be promoted after presiding over a raft of post-Brexit deals, replaces under fire Foreign Minister Dominic Raab, who has now been demoted to Justice Secretary. Raab will retain the role of Deputy Prime Minister. Emmanuel Macron says that French military forces have killed the leader of the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. The French president claims this as another major success in the fight against terror in the Sahel region, after he decided to reduce French troop deployment in the sub-Saharan region. China claims to have successfully vaccinated more than 1 billion people against COVID-19, which is more than 70% of its population. This puts China ahead of the US and Europe in terms of inoculation. In good news for the Indian government's privatization program, the debt-ridden Air India has received bids from top corporate group Tata Sons and SpiceJet. Reports suggest that the bidding process has now moved to the concluding stage. Throwing his support behind vaccinations against COVID-19, Pope Francis says he is puzzled why so many people, including cardinals, are hesitant in taking the jab. The Pope has been fully vaccinated against the infection and has been urging others to get jabbed. SpaceX rocket ship carrying a billionaire and 3 other private citizens blasts off from Florida in the first all-civilian crew ever launched into Earth's orbit. The flight has no professional astronauts and is expected to last for 3 days from launch to splashdown in the Atlantic. China put an emergency response in place after a 6.0 magnitude earthquake rocked its southwestern province of Sichuan. At least 3 people have been reported dead, according to state media. A level 2 response was activated, the second highest in China's 4-tier emergency response system. Virat Kohli has confirmed he will step down as India's T20I captain after the upcoming T20 World Cup. In a statement, Kohli said he had made the decision keeping in mind his workload as a 3-format player. The 32-year-old said he needed to give himself space to continue leading India in tests and ODIs. Rohit Sharma is the frontrunner to replace him. Lionel Messi made his full debut for Paris Saint-Germain in a 1-1 draw against Club Bruges in the Champions League. The 6-time World Player of the Year took the pitch alongside fellow superstars Neymar and Kylian Mbappe for the first time, but was largely kept quiet by the Belgian champions, who drew level after Ander Herrera had opened the scoring for the Parisians.
The Pacific is the new theatre of action. Australia will deploy nuclear-powered submarines in the Pacific region. The US and the UK will help it. This is part of a new plan that they've announced. And they've made quite a splash with it. The idea, we are told, is to keep China in check. But some of America's allies are not happy. What is this new deal? Who will be part of it? And who is opposing it? That's what we'll discuss tonight. First things first, what is it called? It's called Aukus. It's already inspiring memes, but we'll get to that later. This is how it began. Joe Biden, US President, appears before the press, flanked by leaders of the United Kingdom and Australia. Together they announce a new military alliance called AUKUS, an acronym for Australia, United Kingdom, United States. AUKUS, AUKUS. What will they do? Challenge China in the Indo-Pacific.
Although Australia, the UK and US partnership, AUKUS, it sounds strange with all these acronyms, but it's a good one. AUKUS, our nations will update and enhance our shared ability to take on the threats of the 21st century, just as we did in the 20th century.
That's great as far as sales pitches go. AUKUS sounds very promising. It's been called the most significant security arrangement since the Second World War. With its nuclear submarine in the Pacific, it could pose a serious challenge to China. It could also dramatically escalate the threat of war in the Indo-Pacific. Here's what they say they plan to do. Challenge Beijing's territorial claims in the South China Sea. How will they do it? Nuclear-powered submarines. This is very, very significant. For the first time in 50 years, the United States is opening up its box of nuclear secrets. America will arm Australia with 8 nuclear-powered submarines. The arrangement is quite simple. The US will share the technology and build these submarines with the United Kingdom. What will Australia do? They'll pay the bill. Australia will fund the nuclear submarine project. And here's something else that you must know. Until now, the UK was the only country that had access to this American technology. Now Australia joins this very elite club.
We intend to build these submarines in Adelaide, Australia, in close cooperation with the United Kingdom and the United States. But let me be clear, Australia is not seeking to acquire nuclear weapons or establish a civil nuclear capability.
So if they won't fire nuclear missiles, what will these submarines really do? What's their USP? They're much faster, they're harder to detect, they can stay submerged for months, shoot missiles to longer distances, they can also carry more missiles. The biggest USP of a nuclear submarine is that it doesn't need to be refueled, not for a long time. It is powered by a small nuclear reactor on board. So once a nuclear submarine is pressed into service, it can be commissioned with enough uranium fuel to last more than 30 years, 30. Australia will get such technology now. It will be the 7th country in the world to get a fleet of nuclear subs. Which are the other 6? The United States, of course, the United Kingdom, France, China, India, and Russia. All these countries already have nuclear-powered submarines. So where will Australia use these submarines? The answer is quite simple, the South China Sea to start with. With nuclear submarines, Australia could conduct routine patrols through disputed territory. And this is disputed territory because Beijing stakes claim on the entire South China Sea. There are many other countries who do too, on parts of it. China has been building up its naval capabilities in this region. With not just ships or submarines, China is building artificial islands with military installations. So far, Beijing has at least 27 such outposts in the South China Sea. Australia sees these developments as a threat, so it is adding more muscle to its defence forces. The United Kingdom believes this alliance will bring the 3 countries together.
The UK, Australia, and the US will be joined even more closely together, reflecting the measure of trust between us, the depth of our friendship, and the enduring strength of our shared values of freedom and democracy.
Did you notice something in these statements? All 3 leaders did not name China at all. They want to contain the dragon without even naming it. They say they want a free and open Indo-Pacific. The Americans went a step further. Officials from the Biden administration said the alliance is not aimed at any one country, quote unquote. But Beijing got the message. It has called the decision to arm Australia an extremely irresponsible step.
The cooperation between the United States, Britain and Australia on nuclear-powered submarines has severely damaged regional peace and stability, intensified the arms race and undermined international nuclear non-proliferation efforts. The export of highly sensitive nuclear-powered submarine technology by the United States and Britain to Australia once again proves that they are using nuclear exports as a tool of geopolitical games and adopting double standards, which is extremely irresponsible.
Those words could only mean one thing. China will not only match the Western deployments toe-to-toe, it will also challenge them with its own military. The United States, the UK and Australia have taken a bold step to join hands and counter China militarily. Well, that was the easy part. Sticking together and staying the course will be harder. Why do I say this? Because the American president is already having trouble remembering the name of his Aukus ally. Look at how he thanked them.
Thank you, Boris. And I want to thank that fellow down under. Thank you very much, pal. Appreciate it, Mr. Prime Minister. And I want to thank that fellow down under. Thank you very much, pal. Appreciate it, Mr. Prime Minister.
He forgot his name. Thank you, Boris, and that fellow from down under. That's what the US president said. This is what it means to be an American ally, by the way, putting up with their self-obsession all the time. Let's now talk about the reactions to AUKUS. How has the world taken this announcement? China's outrage is understandable. They're getting boxed in. But some in the West are equally unhappy with what has happened, not because China is being targeted, but because they have been left behind. The French, for example, are livid. They have lost out big time, both financially and strategically. This submarine project was supposed to be a French undertaking. In 2016, they signed an agreement. France's naval group would build a new fleet for Australia. There was big money involved, almost $66 billion. But then came AUKUS. They basically swooped in and stole the deal. France is hurt and angry, and their foreign minister is making sure the world knows.
This isn't done between allies, and this isn't done between players who want to develop a coherent, structured Indo-Pacific strategy. In proper French, this is really a stab in the back. We created a relationship of trust with Australia, and that trust has been broken. And today I am angry.
Cette confiance est trahie.
Strong words there. Clearly, France wants to be part of this partnership. Here's what their embassy in Washington said, and I'm quoting, America's choice to exclude a European ally and partner such as France from a structuring partnership with Australia at a time when we are facing unprecedented challenges in the Indo-Pacific region shows a lack of coherence that we can only note and regret. Trust the Europeans to flaunt entitlement. France believes it automatically qualifies for all Indo-Pacific alliances. But why? Their president wants to trade with China. In February, he said the EU should not gang up on Beijing. That's what Macron said. Don't gang up on Beijing. So what's the problem now? Why does Macron suddenly feel left out? There's obviously money involved and prestige. This double cross comes at the wrong time for the French president. Angela Merkel is retiring. That makes Macron, Europe's natural leader. Getting dumped in public will not help his stature. The bottom line is this: the Indo-Pacific needs enthusiastic partners, not half-hearted European have-beens, which is why Britain finds itself on this table. Boris Johnson has been leading a pivot in British policy. He sent a carrier strike group to the South China Sea. Compare that with what the EU did. A German warship, Bayern, is also in the South China Sea. But they did not want to hurt China's feelings. So the ship tried to make a courtesy stop in Shanghai. Do you know what happened? What the Chinese did? They denied permission. They openly snubbed the Germans. This kind of hesitancy will not help in the Indo-Pacific. This is not just, and it's not just Europe. New Zealand too is second-guessing this campaign.
Well, certainly they couldn't come into our internal waters. Our legislation means that nothing that is wholly or fully powered, no vessel that is wholly or fully, partially or fully powered by nuclear energy is able to enter into our internal waters. So that is in fact a position that has been held across parties for a long period of time.
So the Aukus hasn't just rattled China, it has rattled US allies as well, at least some of them. How much of this is bluster and how much of it is serious? For starters, this is not the first Indo-Pacific alliance. We have the Five Eyes, we have the Quad, we have the AUKUS. How is this one different? You see, the AUKUS focuses on military capabilities. The other alliances don't, or they don't spell it out. The Five Eyes, for one, is about intelligence sharing. The Quad is still talking about trade and climate change. And the AUKUS is too narrow. The Indo-Pacific needed a forceful military alliance, and this could be the one. And I'll tell you why. The Americans are heavily invested in it. They don't normally share nuclear reactor technology. They've only done it once, way back in 1958 with Britain. And right now, Joe Biden desperately needs a win. So he's putting a lot of political capital into AUKUS. Plus, the submarines are just the start. America plans to arm Australia with Tomahawk cruise missiles and long-range anti-ship missiles. This alliance will bulk up Australian defense. There is no pretense of competition with China anymore. This is direct confrontation. Like they say in poker, all in. Where does that leave India and the Quad? Joe Biden did reassure his Indo-Pacific allies. But is the region becoming too crowded now? Too many alliances, too many objectives? The good news for India, though, is the level of commitment. America, Britain, Australia, they're all key allies of New Delhi. All three are on the same page against China. India won't have to convince these countries. They clearly are on board. But what about Quad? Is America moving on from Japan and India? Early days, it doesn't seem like it. Quad was never really a military alliance. They never said it. It focused on global commons, as they put it, trade, climate change, and recently COVID-19. AUKUS gives Quad some breathing room. There is no pressure now to become the Asian NATO or to build a fleet against China. AUKUS is doing just that. Instead, the Quad can dismantle China's economic dominance through new supply chains and trade deals. Basically, the Quad and AUKUS can complement each other. In that sense, New Delhi will welcome this alliance. But there's a hidden message there. India must take note of what happened to France and Europe. The alliance of democracies needs active partners, not hesitancy. Now is not the time for second guessing. Because the South China Sea is not the only problem. that China is creating. Almost every day now, China is threatening Taiwan. The PLA is invading the Taiwanese airspace. Taiwan has now decided to spend almost $9 billion more to defend itself. Military upgrades. And even that might not be enough to contain the military tensions in the region.
Is China planning to invade Taiwan? Earlier this month, China sent nuclear bombers into Taiwan's airspace. The move sent alarm bells ringing in Taipei. Taiwan now says it is facing severe threats from China. It wants to spend close to $9 billion on military upgrades. The money will be used to buy new missiles and weapons over 5 years. These upgrades are no longer optional. The Chinese are breathing down Taiwan's neck. Taiwan's Defense Ministry recently released a dire assessment. It said China's armed forces can paralyze Taiwan's defenses. The PLA can fully monitor Taiwanese deployments. It can conduct crippling cyber attacks that will disarm air defenses, the command of the sea, and counterattack systems. These capabilities make the possibility of an invasion look real. For Taiwan, the challenge is existential. They have a modern force, but no real match for the PLA. It's a David versus Goliath scenario. Taiwan is preparing for the worst. They are conducting their annual military drills. Taiwan's forces simulated various conflict scenarios involving the Chinese military, like biological and electronic attacks and a full-scale military invasion. Taiwanese jets rehearsed how to land their planes on highways if the Chinese military decides to blow up their air bases. Taiwan is standing up to the Chinese threat. But its moves have provoked an unlikely critic, North Korea. Its state mouthpiece has published a piece. It slams the United States for backing Taiwan and stirring up trouble for China. This comes as Pyongyang itself is intensifying missile tests. North Korea has conducted its second test in a week. It launched a missile from a train. The missile flew for 800 kilometers before hitting a target within North Korea. First, China's aggressive moves against Taiwan. Now, North Korea's missile launches. The growing military provocations are making the Asia-Pacific a more dangerous place. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
A bit of trivia now. See if you can guess this individual. He's regularly on the news nowadays. I will give you 3 hints about him. He is a quote-unquote charismatic military leader and a deeply pious figure. That's clue number 1. Clue number 2, and I'm quoting again, he stands as the fulcrum for the future of Afghanistan. Clue number 3, he is a quiet, secretive man who rarely gives public statements or interviews. Any ideas? Get ready to be surprised and disgusted. Our John Doe is Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, aka Baradar the Butcher. This is how the Time magazine describes him, charismatic and deeply pious. They have put him on their list of 100 most influential people. Mullah Baradar is a Time 100 alumnus now. Who else is on this list? Simon Biles, the young athlete who stood up against sexual predators. Alexei Navalny, the Russian political campaigner who is still in jail. Katalin Kariko, the biochemist who unlocked mRNA vaccines. Mohammed and Muna il-Kurd, Palestinian activists. These are some of the people on the list, and then you have Mullah Baradar. What is his claim to fame? Co-founder of the Taliban, deputy prime minister of an unrecognized regime, sanctioned by the United Nations Security Council. Baradar is not influential. He is notorious. And the Time magazine should know the difference. They have divided this list into 6 categories. Baradar appears in the list of leaders. Apparently, that's what we are calling terrorists nowadays. It's honestly jarring to read. You have Joe Biden on this list, Narendra Modi, Kamala Harris, Naftali Bennett, all elected leaders. Mullah Baradar does not deserve a place on it. So what is the Times defense? Well, they don't have one because they believe they're right. Here's what the Times editor-in-chief wrote. I find reason for optimism, as I hope you will, in our 18th annual Time 100 list of the world's most influential people. It features extraordinary leaders from around the world working to build a better future, from entertainers striving to make Hollywood more inclusive to activists fighting for sustainability and human rights. How is Mullah Baradar building a better future? How is he fighting for sustainability and human rights of all things? He is not. Baradar held senior positions in the first Taliban regime. He was an accomplice to gross human rights violations. He supported and guarded terrorists, yet he is influential. How does the Time magazine measure influence? Here's what their former managing editor said back in 2007. Influence is less about hard power of force than the soft power of ideas and example. Yes, there are presidents and dictators who can change the world through fiat, but we're more interested in innovators. That was 2007. Frankly, much simpler times. Back then, terrorists were on the run, not lionized in Western magazines. What kind of message does this send to readers, especially younger readers? They see scientists, they see athletes, politicians, and all of a sudden, Baradar pops up. It's simply irresponsible journalism. Unfortunately, it is also the Times brand of journalism. They have a habit of chasing power, and it doesn't matter if it's a dictator or a terrorist. All that matters is hogging the headlines. Take their Person of the Year award. It's another eternal controversy. We've seen some shockers over the years, but 1938 and 39 take the cake. Hitler and Joseph Stalin. Together, these two men killed nearly 30 million people. But the Time magazine named them Persons of the Year. Stalin got it twice. It tells you a lot about their ideology. It's less about activism and righteousness, it's more about catching eyeballs. You put Baradar on the list and everyone talks about it. It doesn't matter if he's a sanctioned terrorist. Time has amplified a dangerous trend emerging in the West. The definition of a so-called moderate Taliban. That's what the Times bio says. Baradar nonetheless, I'm quoting here, Baradar nonetheless represents a more moderate current within the Taliban, the one that will be thrust into the limelight to win Western support. Just to be clear, moderate is the wrong word. You have ultra-extremists and extremists. There are no moderates in the Taliban. The Time magazine failed to realize this. They have given the Taliban something valuable: legitimacy. Which brings us to Pakistan, giving the Taliban legitimacy. Remember the time when Imran Khan said that Germany and Japan shared borders? Or the time when he called Africa a country? Or that instance when he attributed a quote by Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore to the famous Lebanese poet Khalil Gibran? These are all gems from the Pakistani Prime Minister. He has a habit of creating his own history and geography. Now he's also given us a glimpse of his expertise in anthropology. In a recent interview, Prime Minister Khan expressed disdain for American ignorance and then went on to invent a new Pashtun tribe. He said, and I'm quoting, "The Haqqanis are a Pashtun tribe living in Afghanistan. They were mujahideen who were fighting the Soviets, and that they were born in a Pakistani refugee camp." The Haqqanis are a Pashtun tribe since when? Last we checked, they were a terror outfit named after the Darul Uloom Haqqaniya, a Deobandi seminary in Pakistan, not a refugee camp. And the seminary is named after Maulana Samiul Haq. It's an Ivy League college of sorts for jihadists, the seminary. Jalaluddin was one of its first graduates. He added Haqqani to his surname as a tribute to the seminary and formed the Haqqani network. Jalaluddin Haqqani belonged to the Zadran clan of Pashtuns, as do most of the Haqqani network's operatives today. The Haqqanis are not a Pashtun tribe, at least not in this universe. And just so you understand it correctly, the statement came from Imran Khan, who is a Pashtun himself, by the way, from the Niazi tribe. What sort of a hit wicket was this? And just when you thought it couldn't get worse, Imran Khan decided to address accusations about Pakistan's support to the Taliban. He said, and I quote, "The total budget of Pakistan is $50 billion for 220 million people. Do we have the capacity to fund another war when we can barely meet our own expenses?" In other words, what he meant was that Pakistan couldn't have supported the Taliban because it is broke. For a lay Westerner, the statement may seem like the gospel truth. Pakistan is a poor country after all, struggling to make ends meet, only that it indulges in cost-cutting to fund seminaries that nurture terrorists. Look at this 2019 headline from Dawn, when the PTI-led Khyber Pakhtunkhwa government diverted 30 million rupees, meant for higher secondary schools, to fund the Darul Uloom Haqqaniya, the same seminary, and this is from their domestic budget. Then they get foreign aid. Since 2002, the United States has given Pakistan more than $33 billion in aid to combat terrorism and insurgency. This is according to data by the US State Department. Where did all of this money go? To terror networks, which Imran Khan thinks are harmless Pashtun tribes. And this is just the state support we're talking about. Ever since the Taliban re-emerged, public donations to these terrorists have soared, and how? Local community mosques in Quetta and Peshawar have been organizing fundraisers for the Taliban. Traders, shopkeepers, clerics, they're all donating as much as $70 every Friday. And Imran Khan says Pakistan doesn't have the capacity to fund the Taliban. This is a bunch of lies. But we'll come back to the interview. The Pakistani Prime Minister had another request for world leaders. He said, and listen to this carefully, instead of sitting and thinking that we can control them, the world should incentivize Afghanistan and provide some more time to the Taliban to form a legitimate government and make good on their promises such as women's rights. Give them incentives, he says. Give them time. Just like they gave incentives to Pakistan. Also, Imran Khan speaks as if Pakistan's own record on women's rights is flawless. I'll show you something. This video of 400 Pakistani men groping, assaulting, tearing the clothes of one woman in broad daylight. This happened on the 14th of August this year, 2021, Pakistan's Independence Day. Imran Khan talks about women's rights in Afghanistan. The Taliban are not interested in women's rights or in forming an inclusive government. The best case scenario is them being less abominable than before. And we can't even be sure of that, given the kind of policies they're already implementing to restrict the role of women in almost every field. The best incentive will be to tell them that they'll be cut off from the rest of the world if they don't mend their ways. As for Imran Khan, perhaps he needs to be incentivized to quit politics and to stop talking about subjects that he has no knowledge of. Let's turn to Russia. The president has gone into self-isolation, President Vladimir Putin, after dozens in his inner circle tested positive for the Wuhan virus. The outbreak comes right after Putin met two world leaders and greeted them with a handshake at a time when cases in Russia are soaring. There is no confirmation on whether he's been infected. Some reports say that he's tested negative. But Putin now joins a long list of world leaders who found themselves in a difficult situation after downplaying the severity of the virus in their country.
After trotting the world and infecting millions of people, the Wuhan virus has now breached one of the most carefully guarded areas in the world. The Kremlin. President Putin's inner circle is infected. The 68-year-old leader is said to have been in close contact with them. He has now been forced to cancel all engagements and is currently in self-isolation.
Вы знаете, что, к сожалению,
I had to cancel my visit to Dushanbe at the last moment. I am very sorry, but this is due to the fact that, as you know, cases of coronavirus have been identified in the immediate environment, and this is not one, not two, but several dozen people. And now we have to observe the self-isolation regime for several days.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
It was unusual for Putin, a man known to showcase strength. A man who hardly ever wore the mask publicly, to give such a statement himself. His staff say the president has tested negative, but he remains in isolation. Interestingly, the outbreak comes right after Putin's meeting with two other presidents. On the 9th of September, he met with President Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus. The two leaders shook hands, and on the 13th of September, he met with President Bashar al-Assad of Syria. Putin greeted him with a firm handshake. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says that Putin proceeded with the meetings because no one's health was endangered. It's not clear what kind of COVID protocols were followed in these meetings. This is in stark contrast to the kind of measures taken last year to protect the Russian president from the virus from China. In June 2020, the Kremlin had set up a disinfection tunnel. Anyone visiting Putin's residence had to pass through it. When the president stepped out for inspections, they made him wear a hazmat suit, and his visitors had to quarantine for weeks before meeting him in person. But since being jabbed in April 2021, Putin has attended a lot of public events without a mask and exercising little caution. Now his closest team members have tested positive. The president is self-isolating. He joins a long list of world leaders who have suffered by downplaying the virus. This includes former US President Donald Trump, who called the virus just another flu, only to end up being severely infected himself. Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro, who refused to take the vaccine, only to end up being hospitalized. And British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who bragged about shaking hands with everybody and caught the virus soon after. The case of Vladimir Putin is yet another reminder on why the world still cannot afford to let its guard down. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
What I'm about to tell you now may sound unreal. The people of Indonesia have won a lawsuit against their own president, Joko Widodo, who's been found guilty of unlawful acts. That's right, the citizens of a country sued their own leader and won. The battle was for clean air. It started 2 years back when at least 32 residents of Jakarta sued the Indonesian government, 3 cabinet ministers, 2 provincial leaders and the governor of Jakarta for failing to combat air pollution in the country's national capital. Jakarta is home to 10.5 million people. Constantly ranks among the world's worst cities for air pollution. On several occasions, its AQI scores have outstripped cities like Delhi, Beijing and Dubai. A large percentage of the air pollution comes from cars and motorbikes. In 2019, the people of the Indonesian capital sought measures. They asked the authorities to take action, but the government remained dismissive. This is when this group of 32, which included ordinary citizens, activists, academics and artists, came together and filed a lawsuit. The demands were quite simple. 2 basic things that they wanted from the government. One was to revise regulations on air pollution and 2, tighten national air quality standards. This was in July 2019. 2 years and numerous hurdles later, the verdict in the case is finally out. On Thursday afternoon, a 3-judge bench at the Central Jakarta District Court sided in favor of the plaintiffs. It declared the president guilty, plus the other 7 government officials. The court said the defendants have committed unlawful acts by failing to act on the requests of the people.
Firstly, the claim of the plaintiffs is partially granted. Secondly, I state that defendants, the President, the Home Affairs Minister and Environment Minister, the governors of Jakarta and West Java, and other senior officials have committed unlawful acts. Thirdly, I sentence the President to establish national air and ambient quality standards to protect humans and the environment.
So what happens next? The ruling obliges the president to establish national air quality standards and the country's health minister to devise strategies to control air pollution, including an evaluation of industrial emissions and making older vehicles undergo tests for pollution. The plaintiffs say that the verdict may not have met all their expectations, but it's still historic, given how it held the leaders accountable for not doing enough.
We really appreciate that the 20 points related to inventory, supervision and others were granted or accepted by the panel of judges, and this is a historic decision for us regarding air quality or air pollution prevention.
Now, whatever be the merits of the case, it illustrates the power of the people in a democracy. When you can elect representatives to lead you, Also sue them if they fail you. Indonesia is not the first country to witness this. It has happened in several democracies before. Thriving, functional democracies. In 2020, a group of young people in the Netherlands sued their government for inaction on climate change. And they won. The country's Supreme Court ordered the government to curb carbon emissions by 25%. Power of the people. In 2018, 25 people in Colombia won a lawsuit against their government for failing to protect the Amazon rainforest. The list is long, the point is short. We all deserve the right to live in a healthy environment, and our leaders have the responsibility to guarantee this. If they fail in their duties, then you have every right to ask questions and seek action through legal means. Now here's a story where the victims cannot speak out. Every year, Denmark's autonomous territory, the Faroe Islands, witnesses a mass killing of dolphins. For several years, activists from around the world have called for an end to this practice. But the hunters have dismissed those demands. They say this culling is part of a tradition. This time around, it's different because the locals are outraged. More than 1,400 dolphins have been killed in a record-breaking slaughter. This report tells you more.
The Faroe Islands are famous for their beauty. But the world remembers them for a yearly massacre of dolphins. This year, more than 1,400 dolphins were slaughtered. Footage from the scene showed a long line of dead dolphins. They were placed right next to waters that had turned red with their blood. For the hunters, the culling is a tradition that has been in practice for hundreds of years now. Sunday's hunt was no different for them. Every year, international activist groups condemned the practice. But this time, even locals are shocked by the scale of the killing. They claim this was the largest culling on a single day, ever. Some of the locals say this year's hunt was a big mistake, but the hunters who were involved are yet to be punished. Reports say the catch was approved by the authorities and no laws were broken. Advocates of the hunts point to the fact that the practice is regulated. Only hunters with official training certificates are allowed to take part. That justification may not satisfy the angry locals this time. A poll found that half of them want the killings of the dolphins to be stopped. That negative public sentiment could lead to a renewed campaign to end these massacres. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Let me end tonight's show with a strange question. What do you remember about your office? Do you remember your desk or your cabin? The password for your work computer? I ask because many of us have been working from home for a long time. Remote work was the hip word of 2020. Millions of workers stopped going to office. Instead, they work from home, or should I say, from the comfort of their home. It's clear why workers like remote jobs. More time at home, more time with your family, and the best part is comfortable clothes, some would say. Turns out people want to stick with that arrangement. Let me show you what a survey in Britain found. 70% workers do not think they will return to office. 70%. And 79% business leaders think the same, that their workers will remain at home. Is this the end of offices then? Not yet. You see, the staff may like work from home, but do bosses approve? Do they think remote work is less creative? Let's go back to the same survey. 50% of the business leaders said yes, work from home will affect creativity and collaboration. The workers disagree though. Only 38% of them say there will be negative effects. And this could be a point of friction going forward, corporate bosses versus workers. Historically, that never ends well for workers. Every company is choosing its own policy. Take Twitter, for instance. They're offering work from home as a permanent option, but their fellow tech giant Apple is not. They're calling workers back to office. And the debate is not just about performance. Most surveys say work from home does not affect performance. If anything, people seem excited to work. The question is creativity and teamwork. Can a dozen people meeting over a computer collaborate effectively? Would they work better around a table? In some cases, yes. Again, I go back to the survey. 60% people think young workers need face-to-face interaction. They need mentoring. not over the internet, but inside the office. Especially workers from underprivileged communities, they need personal help. If not, their career graph could be affected. At the end of the day, it depends on cost and benefits. Do companies see sense in calling employees back? If yes, then offices are here to stay. But if they're happy with the performance, then no, offices will disappear. There are in fact arguments on both sides. For companies, no rent for buildings, no electricity costs, no transit bills. That's a lot of savings. Same for workers, no special wardrobe, no traveling expenses, and more time at home. So it's still too early to say if offices will disappear completely, but here's what we can say. The myth of office invincibility has been busted. Most work can be done from home. Most meetings can be done online. And if you don't have to fly 100 miles for a simple presentation anymore. Offices may not disappear, but they could certainly become less visible. Some companies are pushing back against this narrative. Microsoft, for one, conducted an internal survey on work from home. They say collaboration and communication was affected. The fact is, the future of offices will depend on companies. Already, many of them are recalling employees. So here's a thought. What if productivity drops in post-pandemic offices? Will they revert to remote working? Possibly. But all of this depends on us beating the virus, and that battle is still ongoing. With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.
Oh, nice. Got it.